The sky over Earth darkened as enormous alien warships broke through the atmosphere, their metal hulls reflecting the sun's dying light. The people below watched in terror as the invaders made their presence known, their message broadcasted across every screen, radio, and device: surrender or be destroyed. Panic spread like wildfire. Governments scrambled to respond, but deep down, they all knew the truth: humanity was outmatched. The Zythar Dominion, a race of ruthless conquerors, had crushed countless civilizations before, and now Earth was their next target. Their ships hovered in the sky like silent predators, waiting to strike. Then, without warning, they descended, choosing the vast, empty desert as their landing site. They believed it to be an uninhabited, lifeless wasteland perfect for establishing a foothold. But what their scanners failed to detect was something far older and far more dangerous than their entire fleet. As the first wave of Zythar soldiers stepped onto the burning sands, the air around them felt unnaturally still. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, its golden dunes shifting slightly in the wind. There was no resistance, no signs of human defenses, no sign of anything that could challenge them. Their commanders, confident in their superiority, ordered the construction of a forward base. Massive machines rumbled to life, drilling into the ground, setting up defensive turrets, and deploying energy barriers. The Zythar thought they had already won. They had conquered countless planets before. Why would this one be any different? But then, the first sign of something strange appeared. Their instruments began to fail. Communications between the ships and the ground forces became filled with static. Energy weapons flickered as if something unseen was draining their power. The temperature, already scorching, seemed to rise unnaturally. Reports came in from different squads, soldiers disappearing without a trace, their footprints the only thing left in the sand. The commanders dismissed it as human sabotage, refusing to believe that something beyond their understanding was at play. But then the ground trembled. At first, it was subtle, barely noticeable beneath their heavy boots. Then, it became impossible to ignore. The sand beneath their feet shifted, rippling like water, and the dunes in the distance began to collapse. A deep, rumbling sound echoed through the land, a sound that did not belong to the wind or the shifting earth. Something was waking up. The Zythar, trained warriors who had never known fear, found themselves gripping their weapons tighter, their eyes scanning the empty horizon. Their technology, so advanced that it had never failed them before, was now useless. Their scanners could detect no threats, no enemies, yet the uneasy feeling in the air grew stronger with every passing second. Then, without warning, the first structure emerged. From beneath the shifting sands, a massive stone pillar shot upward, covered in glowing symbols that pulsed like a heartbeat. It was followed by another and another, until an entire ruin, long buried and forgotten, stood before them. The structures were unlike anything recorded in human history, their surfaces etched with patterns that seemed to twist and shift under the alien light. The Zythar, intrigued but wary, approached, their weapons raised. The moment the first soldier touched the stone, a surge of energy erupted from the ruins, sending a blinding wave of light across the desert. Screams filled the air as the front lines were thrown back, their armor melting as if exposed to an unseen fire. The desert, once still and quiet, had come alive. From the depths of the ruins, figures began to emerge tall, towering constructs of stone and metal, their forms humanoid but unmistakably alien. Their eyes burned with an eerie golden glow, and as they moved, the very sand beneath them obeyed their will. They were not machines, nor were they creatures of flesh and blood. They were something else entirely, something ancient, something built long before Earth had fallen into human hands. The Zythar, now fully aware that they had made a mistake, opened fire. Their plasma rounds, powerful enough to disintegrate entire buildings, struck the constructs, but the attacks simply vanished upon impact, absorbed into the glowing symbols that covered their bodies. The desert was fighting back. Panic spread through the alien ranks as the first wave of Zythar warriors were torn apart, not by weapons, but by the sand itself. It swallowed them whole, dragging them beneath the surface, their screams muffled by the shifting earth. Others were struck down by beams of golden energy, their bodies turning to dust before they even had a chance to flee. The towering constructs moved with a purpose, their every step shaking the ground. The Zythar, once the apex predators of the galaxy, were now the prey. Their commanders screamed orders, demanding an immediate retreat, but their ships remained motionless in the sky. The energy field surrounding the desert had grown stronger, locking them in. They had not just landed in an empty wasteland. They had landed in a graveyard, a place where invaders were not welcome, where those who dared to step upon the sacred ground were punished without mercy. Above, orbiting in their command vessels, the remaining Zythar watched in horror as their forces were annihilated. This was not the primitive world they had expected. Earth was hiding something. Something dangerous. Something even their most advanced technology could not comprehend. And now it was awake. As the last of the ground troops were consumed by the sands, a single message, not from the Zythar, but from the ruins themselves, echoed through the remains of their transmission network. You were warned. The meaning was clear. Earth was not to be conquered. Earth was not to be claimed. The Zythar had made the same mistake so many before them had made, and like those before them, they would not live to tell the tale. The desert was no longer silent. The air vibrated with an energy that had not stirred for thousands of years. The ruins, now fully uncovered, pulsed with golden light, their strange symbols shifting and changing as if they were alive. The Zythar, once so confident in their conquest, stood frozen in fear. Their weapons had failed them. Their soldiers had vanished into the sands. Their ships, which should have been their salvation, were locked in place, unable to respond to their desperate distress calls. The only thing they had left was their arrogance, but even that was starting to crumble as the ground beneath them trembled with a force beyond their understanding. The towering stone constructs, the guardians of this ancient place, moved with a slow, deliberate grace, their glowing eyes fixed upon the invaders. They did not speak, nor did they hesitate. They simply advanced, and with every step, the desert itself seemed to shift in their favor. The Zythar commander, a veteran of 100 planetary conquests, refused to accept defeat. He barked orders at his remaining soldiers, demanding they stand their ground. Plasma rifles were raised once more, and a barrage of energy fire lit up the night, illuminating the battlefield in flickering bursts. But the beams of destruction, capable of tearing through steel and flesh alike, vanished upon striking the constructs. The ancient warriors absorbed the attacks, their bodies pulsing brighter with every hit. It was as if the very act of aggression only strengthened them. The realization dawned too late. One by one, the Zythar weapons overheated, short-circuited, and fell silent. The soldiers, trained to never retreat, now found themselves standing unarmed against something they could not fight. And then the desert itself attacked. The sand beneath their feet rose like a living creature, twisting into sharp spear-like formations that struck with deadly precision. Some Zythar were impaled instantly, their bodies collapsing before they could even scream. Others were swallowed whole as the ground opened beneath them, their limbs flailing before being dragged into the abyss. The commander watched in horror as his forces, the same warriors who had conquered entire star systems, were reduced to nothing more than helpless prey. But the worst was yet to come. From deep within the ruins, a sound began to rise. It was not a roar, nor a scream, but something far more terrifying, a deep, resonating hum that filled the air like a heartbeat. The symbols on the structures pulsed faster, the golden light intensifying until it was nearly blinding. The Zythar, already panicked, fell to their knees as their bodies grew weaker, as if something was draining them. Their exosuits, designed to withstand extreme conditions, were failing. Their very life force was being pulled away, fed into the ruins, into the constructs, into the desert itself. And then, from the heart of the ruins, something woke up. A massive stone door, hidden beneath the sands, cracked open with a thunderous boom. A rush of ancient air, untouched by time, spilled out, carrying with it a feeling of sheer, undeniable power. The Zythar commander barely had time to react before a figure emerged. Unlike the towering constructs, this being was different, taller, more defined, and radiating a presence so overwhelming that even the air around it seemed to tremble. It was humanoid in form, yet it was clear this was no ordinary being. Its body was carved from the same stone as the ruins, its skin covered in intricate markings that glowed like fire. Its eyes burned like twin suns, and when it looked at the Zythar, it was not with anger, but with something far worse, judgment. The commander, despite his fear, forced himself to speak. He demanded to know what this creature was, why it was attacking them, and what right it had to interfere. But the being did not respond with words. Instead, it raised its hand. The symbols on its body flashed brighter, and in an instant, the very air around the Zythar soldiers turned against them. The temperature, already unbearable, became deadly. The heat, once radiating from the sun above, now poured from the ground itself, cooking them in their armor. Some collapsed instantly, their bodies unable to withstand the sudden, unnatural shift. Others screamed as their skin cracked, their exosuits melting away like wax. The commander, his breath stolen by the sheer intensity of it all, could do nothing but fall to his knees as his army was wiped out without a single word. But the destruction did not stop there. High above, in orbit, the Zythar fleet had been watching in horror. They had seen everything: the failure of their ground forces, the collapse of their technology, the awakening of something far beyond their comprehension. And now, as the desert's power reached its peak, they felt it. The energy that had been trapped for millennia surged upward, wrapping around the alien warships like invisible chains. Their engines flickered, their shields shattered, and one by one, the ships began to fall. The sky burned as the once mighty fleet was dragged toward the planet, their hulls glowing with the friction of re-entry. Some tried to fight, their weapons firing in all directions, but it was useless. The desert had claimed them. The ancient power, long dormant, had been reawakened, and it would not allow them to escape. The commander, barely alive, looked up in his final moments to see his flagship, his proud, unstoppable warship, collide with the ruins, shattering into a storm of fire and debris. And then, silence. The desert, once filled with the sounds of war, was still again. The ancient figure, its task complete, lowered its hand. The golden glow in its eyes faded slightly, and for a moment it simply stood, as if remembering something long forgotten. The sand settled. The ruins remained standing, untouched by the destruction around them. The last traces of the Zythar were gone, wiped away as if they had never existed. The desert had always been alive. It had simply been waiting for the right moment, for the right threat to awaken. And now, as the stars above twinkled once more in the darkened sky, it returned to its slumber, waiting for the next enemy foolish enough to set foot upon its sacred ground. The ruins stood silent once more, but the desert had not forgotten. It had seen the arrogance of the invaders, the way they landed without fear, believing themselves to be rulers of all they saw. It had watched as they raised their weapons, as they defied the ancient power buried beneath the sands. And now, it would show them the price of their mistake. High above, the last remaining Zythar ships, those that had not yet been torn from the sky, hovered in a desperate attempt to escape. Their captains shouted commands, ordering evasive maneuvers, trying to break free from the unseen force holding them in place. But the desert had them now, and it was not finished. Below, the golden light that had once illuminated the ruins began to shift. It did not fade, nor did it flicker. It moved, spreading out across the sands like a living wave. The ground trembled as ancient power surged through it, awakening something deeper, something even the Guardians had not yet revealed. The sand, once still and passive, began to rise. Not in the way the wind might carry it, not in the form of a storm, but as something with purpose. It coiled like a serpent, shaping itself into towering figures, vague, shifting forms that moved with unnatural speed. The remaining Zythar forces, the few that had survived the initial devastation, stood frozen, their bodies shaking. They had fought enemies before. They had seen monstrous creatures on distant worlds, had battled species more powerful than themselves. But they had never fought the land itself. The first soldier barely had time to scream before he was engulfed. The sand wrapped around him, creeping into every crack of his armor, slipping past the advanced seals, filling his mouth, his lungs, suffocating him in seconds. The others turned to run, but the desert was faster. It reached for them, pulling them under, swallowing them into the endless abyss beneath the surface. Some tried to fire their weapons, but the plasma bursts did nothing. The sand absorbed them, consuming the energy as if feeding on it. The more they fought, the stronger it became. Above, in the last remaining Zythar battleship, the captain stared down in horror. His fleet was gone. His army wiped out. The planet, which they had deemed weak and defenseless, had destroyed them without mercy. The captain's claws gripped the edges of his command console, his breath heavy. He had to escape. He had to report this to the High Dominion. They needed to know Earth was not what they thought it was. His ship's engines roared to life, pushing against the unseen force holding them down. The hull groaned under the pressure, systems flashing red as they fought to break free. The ship shook violently, and for a brief moment he thought they might succeed. Then the sand reached for them. A massive pillar of golden light shot up from the ruins, striking the ship like a spear. The hull cracked instantly, metal melting as if exposed to the heart of a star. The crew screamed as the ship's gravity stabilizers failed, throwing them against the walls. The captain grabbed onto the nearest console, his eyes widening as the sensors displayed something impossible. The sand was pulling them down. Not the planet's gravity, not an external force, but the sand itself. It coiled around the massive warship, dragging it toward the surface like an unseen hand crushing an insect. The captain's final thought was not of victory or glory, but of fear. They had been wrong. They had all been wrong. Earth was not a planet to be conquered. It was a planet that devoured those who tried. The battleship slammed into the desert with a force that sent a shockwave across the land. Fire and debris erupted into the air, but before the flames could spread, the sand swallowed it whole. The wreckage, the bodies, the shattered remains of the once mighty warship, all of it disappeared, buried beneath the endless dunes. The desert was silent once more. The wind carried away the last echoes of the battle, and the ruins, now fully awakened, stood as they always had, watching, waiting. Far beyond the planet, in the cold vastness of space, a single transmission flickered across the Zythar's deep space relays. A distress signal. A warning. It carried no words, no voices, only the last recorded image from the captain's ship. A glimpse of the sand, rising, consuming, destroying. And then nothing. The High Dominion would receive it. They would see it. But whether they would listen, that was another question. The desert did not care. It had won. It would always win. And should another enemy dare to challenge it, it would strike back once more. The sand never forgot. The sand never forgave. The sand always consumed. The deep space exploration vessel Eclipse drifted silently through the void, its sensors scanning the distant world ahead. It was a planet long abandoned, a relic of humanity's past that no one spoke of anymore. Official records called it Novaria, but among historians and scholars, it had another name: Earth's first colony. It was the first planet settled after humanity had conquered the stars, a place where the greatest minds of an era had built cities that touched the heavens. But then, without warning, the colony had fallen silent. No distress signals, no escape ships, no survivors. The entire population had vanished, leaving behind only ruins and mystery. Now, centuries later, the Eclipse had been sent to uncover the truth. As the ship descended, the crew stared at the planet's surface with a mixture of awe and unease. Towering structures, once proud and gleaming, stood in eerie silence, their once advanced technology covered in vines and dust. The streets, wide and built for a thriving civilization, were empty. It was as if the entire population had simply disappeared in an instant. No signs of war, no destruction, just absence. Commander Elias Voss, a man who had spent his life exploring the unknown, felt something he had never experienced before. A sense of being watched. The team landed cautiously, stepping out into a city frozen in time. Their boots echoed against the empty streets, the wind whispering through the hollow buildings. Dr. Anya Calderon, the mission's lead historian, ran her gloved fingers across the walls, brushing away dust to reveal intricate carving symbols that did not belong to any known human language. This isn't just old, she whispered. This is something else. Deeper into the city, they found more strange markings. They were carved into metal, etched into glass, even embedded into the very streets beneath them. But the real discovery came when they reached the center of the city, a vast plaza dominated by a massive structure, unlike anything else they had ever seen. It was a monument, a spire reaching high into the sky, covered in glowing lines of energy that pulsed like a heartbeat. As the crew approached, their suits' sensors flickered. Then, without warning, their comms died. Panic set in as their equipment malfunctioned. The air around them grew heavy, charged with an unseen force. And then the ground trembled. The monument, dormant for centuries, suddenly came to life. The pulsing lines of energy brightened, spreading out like veins, lighting up the entire plaza. The symbols, the ones scattered across the city, began to move. They twisted and reshaped themselves, forming patterns that no human should have been able to understand, yet somehow the crew did. A voice, ancient and commanding, echoed through their minds. "You have returned." The words sent chills down their spines. Elias stepped forward, his voice steady despite the growing unease. Who are you?" The air shimmered, and from the monument emerged a figure. It was not human, nor was it alien. It was something in between. Its form was tall and regal, its body composed of the same glowing energy that now coursed through the ruins. It had no face, yet Elias could feel it staring directly into his soul. "You have forgotten," the being said, its voice filled with something that felt like both sorrow and power. "But we have not." The realization hit Elias like a blow. This place, these ruins, the vanished civilization, they were not an alien race. They were human. This was humanity's first colony, and it had not been lost. It had been erased from history. Dr. Calderon's hands trembled as she pieced it together. They didn't just disappear. They ascended. The being nodded. "We reached beyond flesh. We unlocked the secret of existence itself. We became something more." Elias felt his heartbeat quicken. If this was true, if humanity had once reached a level of power beyond the physical world, then why had they left? Why had they abandoned the rest of their kind? He stepped closer, his voice barely a whisper. "Why didn't you return?" The air grew colder, the light around the being dimming slightly. "Because we were not alone." A deep, distant rumble echoed across the city. The sky, which had been eerily clear, darkened. Something moved in the horizon, something vast and unseen. The ancient being turned its head, as if listening to a sound only it could hear. "They followed us." A pulse of energy rippled through the air, and suddenly they were no longer alone. Shadows, tall and unnatural, emerged from the edges of the city, their forms flickering like distorted reflections. They had no faces, no features, just shifting darkness, hungry and waiting. The monument's light flared, forming a barrier around the crew, but Elias knew it wouldn't hold forever. Dr. Calderon gripped his arm. "What do we do?" The ancient being looked at them, its form shifting, unstable. "You must leave. You must tell the others. Humanity has forgotten its greatest triumph and its greatest enemy." Elias clenched his fists. "We can fight." The being's energy flickered. "Not yet." The shadows surged forward, crashing against the barrier like a tidal wave. The ground cracked, the sky trembled, and the air was filled with a deep, unnatural screech. The crew barely had time to turn before the being raised its hands, and in a flash of blinding light, the team was flung back towards their ship. Elias gasped as he hit the ground, the eclipse's alarms blaring in his ears. He scrambled to his feet, looking out of the viewport in horror. The entire city was now glowing, the symbols flashing rapidly as the monument pulsed faster and faster. The shadows swarmed over it, trying to consume the light, but then, in a final, desperate act, the entire city vanished. No explosion. No destruction. Just gone. Silence filled the ship as the crew sat frozen, unable to process what they had just witnessed. Then, the comms crackled back to life. A single message burned into their ship's database. "Remember us." Elias stared at the screen, his breath shallow. The truth was undeniable now. Humanity had not started from nothing. They had built an empire greater than anyone had ever known. And something out there, something terrible had been waiting for them to return. As the eclipse left orbit, Elias knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. The Zythar High Dominion had ruled the stars for centuries, crushing weaker species, seizing entire planets, and wiping out civilizations that dared resist. They believed themselves invincible, their empire untouchable. But when their warships entered the Sol system, expecting another easy conquest, they had no idea that they had just signed their own death sentence. Their invasion began with precision, a coordinated strike against Earth's orbital defenses. Zythar warships, massive and bristling with weapons, emerged from hyperspace like a swarm of locusts, their cannons raining destruction upon satellites and space stations. The Dominion had studied humanity's history and found it full of war and chaos, yet to them, humans were still primitive. Their fleets were smaller, their numbers fewer. Conquering Earth would be no harder than crushing an insect beneath their boots. But something was wrong. The humans did not panic. They did not scramble in fear or send desperate messages for surrender. Instead, they waited. And when the first wave of Zythar dropships descended into Earth's atmosphere, they never came back. Grand Admiral Kovan, watching from his flagship Devourer of Worlds, frowned as the signals from his landing forces vanished one by one. Thousands of elite Zythar warriors, armed with the best technology in the galaxy, had deployed to key cities New York, Beijing, Moscow, London. Yet, within minutes, their comms went silent. The fleet's scanners detected no explosions, no battles, no human counterattacks. Just silence. It was as if the entire invasion force had been swallowed by the planet itself. Then, the screams began. The first report came from a battleship in low orbit. The crew had detected an anomaly in Earth's electromagnetic field, a strange energy signature that made no sense. Moments later, something reached up from the planet. A pulse of energy, invisible yet devastating, ripped through the ship's hull like paper. The crew barely had time to react before the entire vessel collapsed in on itself, crushed by a force no Zythar technology could counter. A second ship, then a third, suffered the same fate. The fleet, once so mighty, now hung in uncertainty. And then came the human transmission. A voice, cold and emotionless, echoed through every Zythar comm channel. "You have entered restricted space. Your violation of the Sol system will not be tolerated. You have one chance to leave. Refuse, and you will be erased." Admiral Kovan's mandibles clicked in rage. Humans were nothing but vermin, insignificant creatures clinging to a tiny planet. They had no right to threaten the Dominion. He ordered a full planetary bombardment. If humanity refused to surrender, then Earth would be reduced to ash. The warships unleashed their wrath. Thousands of plasma warheads and kinetic missiles rained down, streaking through the sky like meteors. Cities would be wiped from existence. Humanity would be no more. The Zythar would have their victory. And yet nothing happened. The missiles vanished before impact. The plasma rounds dissolved mid-air. The fleet's targeting systems glitched, refusing to lock onto anything on the surface. It was as if some invisible force had rewritten the very laws of physics, denying the Zythar their ability to kill. And then the humans struck back. A single ship rose from Earth's surface, sleek, black, and silent. It had no visible weapons, no heat signatures, no energy readings. Yet, as it ascended, the stars themselves seemed to bend around it. It was small compared to the Dominion's warships, but the moment it reached orbit, the Zythar fleet felt true fear. The Devourer of Worlds locked onto the unknown vessel and fired. A direct hit. The plasma cannon strike, enough to tear a moon in half, connected with the ship. And yet, when the fireball cleared, the human ship remained unharmed. Not shielded, not damaged, untouched. This was no ordinary human technology. This was something else. something the Zythar had never encountered, something far beyond them. The black ship did not fire weapons. It did not need to. It merely moved in an instant. The Devourer of Worlds, the largest, most powerful warship in the Zythar fleet, was gone. No explosion, no debris, just erased from existence, as if it had never been there. Panic spread through the Dominion fleet. Ships tried to flee, their engines burning at maximum output, but it was useless. The black ship flickered, and reality bent. One by one, the Zythar warships vanished. Not destroyed, not disabled, removed from space itself. The few vessels that managed to jump to hyperspace found themselves trapped, unable to navigate, lost in an endless void where time itself refused to move. No Zythar would ever return home. The last transmission from the doomed fleet reached the Dominion's capital hours later. A garbled message, filled with static and terror, repeating the same words over and over. We were wrong. They are not weak. They were waiting. The humans were waiting. Then silence. The Zythar High Dominion, the greatest empire in the galaxy, did not send another fleet to Earth. There was no second invasion, no retaliation, only fear. The name of humanity, once dismissed as insignificant, became a whisper of terror among the stars. The Zythar homeworld, once proud and unstoppable, now lived in the shadow of a nightmare they could not understand. Earth remained untouched, unchallenged, and somewhere beyond the veil of space, the black ship waited. Watching,